Dear viewers, Rome has always fascinated people of literature like poets, writers, historians, etc. for ages. Its glorious past is replete with rich treasures of wisdom, heroic sagas full of subtle human emotions like love, hatred, vengeance, etc. Reflecting range of human skills, reflecting range of human emotions, it has enchanted people across the world for ages. Yes, you got me right. Today, I am going to introduce you to Virgil's The Aeneid, which is a national epic with all its richness in the most interesting way. Before we look into the details of this great epic, we will try to know more about the author. Well, Virgil was born in 70 BC near Mantua in Po Valley in northern Italy. He studied philosophy and rhetoric in Rome, and like most well-educated young Roman men, intended to make a career as a lawyer and politician. But he was too shy, nervous and awkward to succeed in such a career. After one appearance before a jury, Virgil decided to abandon such activities and concentrate on philosophy and poetry. He returned to his home and began to work on a series of 10 poems on a pastoral theme, which we call the eclogues. I repeat, we call them as eclogues. These poems won the approval of Maecenas, a close friend of Octavian, heir to the recently assassinated dictator Julius Caesar. Octavian now ruled Rome with two colleagues, Marc Antony and Lepidus. In 41 BC, these three confiscated large tracts of land to settle their veteran soldiers on. But when Virgil's farm was included in the confiscated territory through the intervention of Maecenas, he was given enough compensation to be able to devote the rest of his life to composing poetry without worrying about money. That kind of the patronage the writers and the poets enjoyed in those golden days. Virgil wrote his second great work, the Georgics, between 37 and 30 BC. This was a textbook on various types of farming, although it may have been intended partly as propaganda for Octavian's attempts to revive Roman agriculture, which had suffered badly in years of civil war. Virgil found the topic so much to his liking that he wrote in this practical handbook for farmers some of the finest of all Latin poetry. In it, he displayed his personal knowledge of the countryside, its farmers, animals and crops, and his deep love for rural Italy. During these years, Virgil had been pondering the writing of an epic poem, a story of heroic adventure, and in 30 BC, aged 40, he began to compose the Aeneid, a poem to express Rome's greatness, God-given destiny, by telling the story of her legendary origins. By 19 BC, the Aeneid was virtually complete. Virgil decided to spend 3 years polishing and revising his poem, and then devote the rest of his life to philosophy. But later that year, while travelling in Greece, he fell ill and was forced to return to Italy. Something else was in store for Virgil. Unfortunately, he died in Brindisium, which is in southeast Italy, within a few days of landing. He left instructions that this poem should be destroyed by Octavian. By now, the Emperor Augustus countenanced his orders and had poem edited, published posthumously. It has been a classic ever since. Now we will look into the epic poem, the Aeneid. The title is Greek in form. Genitive case, Aeneidos, is a Latin epic poem. that tells the legendary story of Aeneas, a Trojan who travelled to Italy, where he became the ancestor of the Romans. It is composed of 9,896 lines in dactylic hexameter. The first 6 of the poem's 12 books tell the story of Aeneas' wanderings from Troy to Italy, and the poem's second half tells of the Trojans' ultimately victorious war upon the Latinus, under whose name Aeneas and his Trojan followers are destined to be subsumed. The hero Aeneas was already known to Greco-Roman legend and myth, having been a character in the Iliad, composed in 8th century BC. Virgil took the disconnected tales of Aeneas' wanderings, his vague association with the foundation of Rome, and a personage of no fixed characteristics other than a scrupulous piety, and fashioned this into a compelling founding myth or national epic that at once tied Rome to the legends of Troy. This explained the Punic Wars, glorified traditional Roman virtues, and legitimized the Julio-Claudian dynasty as descendants of the founders. Now, we will look into the brief summary of each book and how each book has added a new perspective and beauty to this national epic. Now, let us look into book 1 and its gist. Aeneas is a Trojan leader, son of Venus and the mortal Anchises. He suffers, as did the other Trojans, from the wrath of Juno, after the judgment of Paris favoured Venus. The book begins with the Trojan fleet sailing from Sicily and now near Carthage 7 years after the fall of Troy. That was an interesting beginning. Juno bribes Euryalus to unleash storm winds on them, and they founder near Carthage. Venus appeals to Jupiter for their salvation, and he reassures her of their glorious future and a golden age to come. Venus appears to Aeneas disguised as a Carthaginian huntress, tells him of Queen Dido and the settlers from the Tyre who have formed the colony at Carthage, surrounded by potentially hostile people. Venus arranges for her son Cupid, in the form of Aeneas' son Ascanius, to cause Aeneas and Dido to fall in love. To ensure his safety, Dido puts on a feast and her passion rises. In module 3, we focus on recounting the fall of Troy. At Dido's request, Aeneas recounts the fall of Troy. The Trojan horse Aeneas captured Greek Sinon deludes them about the reason why the horse was constructed to appease Minerva or Athena after their attack on her temple. Laocoon, a priest who spears the horse, is attacked by 2 serpents along with his sons. The Trojans break down their wall to get the horse inside. At night, the Greeks sail back to the shore and Sinon releases the men in the horse. A vision of Hector appears to Aeneas, telling him to flee the ensuing destruction and found a new city. The palace is attacked, Priam slain by Pyrrhus, Achilles' son. Pyrrhus is Achilles' son. Aeneas considers killing Helen, but Venus deters him. A divine portent appears over the head of Euryalus, Ascanius or Aeneas' son. Anchises refuses to flee at first but is persuaded, and Aeneas carries him on his shoulders. His wife Croesus becomes separated and dies. Her spirit comes to him and prophesies his great future. Book 3 very interestingly captures the wanderings of Aeneas. After sailing from Troy, they sailed north to Thrace and founded Aeneid. But the ghost of Polydorus wants them to leave. After consulting with the Delian oracle, Anchises misinterprets the advice to seek the land that first bore the Trojan race. They sail to Crete, again try to found a settlement, but a pestilence ensues. Aeneas dreams that Hesperia, the land of the west, or Italy, is their ultimate goal, and they sail west. They encounter the Harpies led by Celaeno and the Strophides west of Greece. After they kill her cattle, they attack the Trojans. Celaeno prophesies his future. They sail on to Leucas in Greece and stay a year. At Buthrotum in Chaonia, now part of Epirus, they are welcomed by the former Trojan Helenus, who was enslaved by the Greeks but has been freed and made a king, married to Andromache. Helenus prophesies the Italian future and the route to take, including going to Sibyl at Cumae. Book 4 focuses on two main characters, Dido and Aeneas. Though bound by a vow to her husband, Sychaeus, killed by his brother Pygmalion, Dido has a rising passion for Aeneas, which her sister Anna encourages. Juno gets Venus to agree to the union and arranges a hunt and a storm to bring them together in a cave. Her former suitor, King Eubus, is jealous. Jupiter sends Mercury to chastise Aeneas and to remind him of his destiny, which does not lie with Dido. Dido rebukes Aeneas, but Aeneas explains to her his duty without emotion, as prompted by Jupiter, and denies that they were in fact married. Dido is angered at him and swears vengeance. She tries to get Anna to delay their departure, then received bad omens and realizes she is doomed. Mercury warns Aeneas to flee and they hastily depart in their ships. Dido orders an attack on them and curses them, pledging eternal war with the Carthaginians. She ascends to the pyre and kills herself with a sword. Module 4 captures the gist of Book 5, which focuses on the funeral games for Anchises. As they sail back to Eryx in Sicily, they see the flames in the distance. King Acestus receives them hospitably. He and Aeneas decide to hold funeral games to honor Anchises, who died 1 year ago. They have a race of ships won by Cloanthus, foot races, Euryalus, boxing won by Entulus, archery and equestrian maneuvers. Iris, disguised as the old Trojan woman Bero, is sent by Juno to stir up the trouble. She incites the woman to set many of the ships on fire. Now look at the different shades of jealousy which were meant to destroy people. Jupiter douses the fires. Notus advises them to divide the group up, leaving the old and wary to found the settlement of Acesta near Eryx there on Sicily. The image of Anchises appears to Aeneas, asking to come to him in the underworld. Venus appeals to Neptune and is reassured that only one man will die as they sail to Italy. The helmsman Palinurus is put to sleep by the god of sleep and falls in to the water, an example of double determination, where a person's actions are influenced by the gods as well as his own will. Remember the theme, fate and own will. Book 6, it captures the lower world. The ships land at Cumae on the west coast of Italy. Aeneas seeks the Cumaean Sibyl, prophetess, at Apollo's temple and was founded by Daedalus. The Sibyl prophesies war and the trials ahead. Aeneas asks her help in visiting his father. She asks him to bring a golden bow for Proserpina in order to gain admittance. Look at different plans, different plots, and the way the whole book was directed. He learns also that one of his men, newly deceased, Micinus, must be buried. They proceed with the cremation. Aeneas prepares to enter the cavern by the lake Avernus, leading to the underworld. Hecate nears, but Sibyl warns her away. They pass many personified evils and monsters, Briareus, Chimera, Scylas, etc. He encounters Palinurus, who cannot yet cross the Styx into the underworld because his body was not buried. Charon is appeased by the golden bow and the sedate Cerberus. They pass the infants, the fields of mourning, and he encounters Dido and offers her more excuses. She turns away from him to her husband Sychaeus. They also encounter Trojans and Greeks, including Deiphobus and the third husband of Helen. Deiphobus' third husband of Helen. Tartarus, on the road to the left, is described as a place of suffering and punishment for those found guilty by the judge Rhadamanthus for a variety of enumerated punishable sins. Instead, they turn right. Aeneas places the bow to the threshold of Proserpina and finally enters Elysium. There he encounters Anchises, and there are spirits there awaiting reincarnation after drinking of Lethe to induce forgetfulness. Look at the richness of the imagination of the poet. Anchises predicts the future. The Alban kings, other kings, Romulus, Euryalus, Numa, etc. Anchises says that Rome's fame will be for its leadership and contribution to government rather than for its artistic contributions. That is, the focus is on leadership skills. He ends with panegyric to Augustus' deceased son Marcellus. Aeneas re-emerges to the world of the living. Book 7, it captures the outbreak of war and the picture of Italy during that period. They sail past Circe's island and land near Tiber's mouth in Latinum. Remember Tiber, the river. The Laurentians or Latins are ruled by King Latinus. The spirit of Faunus tells Latinus that his daughter Lavinia should marry a foreigner. More omens, more signs, and more designs in future. The Trojans come to see the king, who treats them generously and offers Aeneas his daughter in marriage. Juno is angered by this tranquil scene and sends the fury Allecto to stir up discord and war. In a remarkably poetic description, she infects Queen Amata with resentment at her husband's decision. Amata hides Lavinia and goes into frenzied rage with some bacchantes. A simile of a top describes her. Allecto also stirs up the Rutilians, in particular Turnus, their king, who has been the chief suitor of Lavinia. Turnus seems to plan to march on both the Trojans and the Laurentines. Allecto also causes Euryalus or Ascanius, Aeneas' son, to wound a deer, a stag kept as a royal pet by Tyrrhus. This is the precipitating event and war breaks out. Allecto gloats and Latinus is powerless to stop the preparations. The people arm for war and the gates of war are thrown open by Juno after Latinus refuses. A catalogue of combatants against Troy is given, as in the Iliad, including the tyrant Mezentius, Messapus, Virgil, and the Volscian warrior maiden Camilla. Module 5, it gives some more details of Book 8, which revolves around Aeneas at the site of Rome. Well, in this book, the confusion reigns. Aeneas is compared to a bowl of water. Tiber, the river god, appears to Aeneas in a dream and encourages Aeneas. Aeneas prays to Tiber, who assists his ships upstream and advises him to ally with Evander, son of Mercury, and therefore he becomes his kin. He is the leader of Arcadians living on the site of current Rome, Pallanteum. On the Palatine hill, he sees the white saw that had been prophesied and encounters Evander's beloved son Pallas. Evander agrees to ally. He tells of Hercules' victory over the half-man monster Cacus, a civilizing action. There is a local cult of Hercules worshippers. Evander recites other local history. Saturn gave local law and order and the name of Latium. There was a golden age. They tour the landmarks of the future Rome. Evander lives simply and exemplifies the simple virtues admired by the future Roman state. Remember, the Aeneid always emphasizes on the number of virtues an ideal man should possess. Venus appeals to her husband Vulcan to make armor for Aeneas. His Cyclops get right to work on this and their forges on the island of Volcano. Evander tells of Aegila in Etruria and suggests Aeneas ally with them as well. He also describes the sadistic leader Mezentius. Evander nobly and unselfishly turns his beloved son Pallas over to Aeneas to become a warrior, along with many of his warriors and horsemen. Evander recalls his heroic past, then prays for his son. Venus delivers the armor to Aeneas and tells him not to fear war. His shield is decorated with depicts of future Roman triumphs. The virtuous man always gets support from all corners of this world and the other world. It is a proven thing. Book 9 describes attacks on the Trojan camp in the absence of Aeneas. While Aeneas was still away with Evander, Juno sends Iris to mobilize Turnus to action. The enemy marches on the Trojan camp, which is alongside the river. The Trojans stay behind their walls as Aeneas had instructed them. After they do not respond to Turnus' challenge, he tries to set their camps on fire. The goddess Sibyl or Rhea is worried about the Trojan ships which had been constructed out of her sacred grove and had previously appealed to her son Jupiter to save them. He now acts and the ships are turned into sea nymphs, leaving the Trojans no alternative but to stay on land and fight. Turnus goads on the Rutulians and the fort is surrounded except the side open to the river. Nisus and Euryalus, they were both her close friends, heroically resolve to try to get word to Aeneas at Pallanteum of the seas. But unfortunately, Euryalus was captured and killed, and the Trojan camp was under the siege. It was very, very unfortunate. Euryalus, who was the hero, was killed and faced a miserable death. Book 10 captures the heroic deeds of Aeneas at war. With the Trojan camp under siege, the gods debate the conflict. Venus appeals to Jupiter to at least spare Euryalus, to which Juno angrily encounters. Jupiter responds that he will be neutral and that the fates will determine the outcome. Juno also appeals to Jupiter to intervene and spare Turnus. She then disguises herself as Aeneas and lures Turnus aboard to a ship in pursuit of him. The ship promptly sails away, temporarily saving Turnus. Mezentius joins the battle, offers to give captured armor to his son Lausus, a sacrilege, and is wounded by Aeneas. Lausus defends his wounded father and is slain by Aeneas. Aeneas takes pity on Lausus and shows respect for his body and the necessary burial rituals. Mezentius laments his son's death and then charges Aeneas on his horse Rabius and is slain. Book 11 elaborately captures the despair of the Latins. The battle pauses for funeral rites for the numerous victims. Aeneas mourns the death of Pallas. His body is taken to King Evander. Even Pallas' horse Ethan weeps. The Latinus petition for peace to bury the dead. Aeneas wonders how destiny has brought about this unexpected war. Evander mourns the death of Pallas and calls for Turnus' death. Pyrrhus consumes the bodies, which are then buried. The Latins receive word via Romulus and Diomed, now living in RP, is not willing to join in fighting once again with the Trojans, saying that he has no quarrel with them anymore, that he has suffered enough punishment for his past actions, and that he expects further retribution for his attack on Venus. He advises the Latins to make a treaty with the Trojans. In a council of the Latins, the crafty Dransus, who is hostile to Turnus, offers suggestions for ending the conflict, including the Turnus go into single combat and is largely responsible for it. Turnus angrily responds that he is not ready to concede defeat, wants more war, and accepts the challenge to engage in single combat with Aeneas. The council is interrupted by the news that the Trojans and Etruscans are advancing. Turnus calls the men to arms. The noble female warrior Camilla tells Turnus that she wishes to lead her Volscians against the Etruscan riders without Turnus' assistance. He praises her, but says that they will fight together. Quickly capture Camilla's story for you. Her father, Metabus, lived in exile after escaping from the Volscians. When forced to cross a river, he tied her to a spear and consecrated her to Diana, then hurled her safely across and swam himself. Camilla grew up to cherish Diana's weapons. The battle begins. Camilla fights heroically. Tarquin rallies his horsemen. The Arans stalk Camilla. She is distracted by Clorius' shining armor, which she wants to capture, and is slain by Arans, who awaits her in ambush. Oppius, Diana's sentinel, kills Arans. The Latins flee in disarray. Turnus, who had stalked out an ambush for Aeneas, leaves the spot just before Aeneas. Aeneas comes by as all are converging on the city of Laurentum. Book 12, which captures the beauty of the final combat. Turnus meets with Latinus and indicates he expects Lavinia's hand if he wins. Latinus advises. Turnus meets with Latinus and he indicates he expects Lavinia's hand if he wins. Latinus advises him his request cannot be granted because she is destined to marry a foreigner. Destiny plays a vital role here again, and asks him to relent and break off the combat, sparing them all further needless deaths. But Queen Amata is adamant that she will not accept Aeneas as her son-in-law. Turnus issues a challenge to Aeneas for single combat, the victor to receive Lavinia's hand. Many are slain by the two heroes before their final confrontation. Aeneas considers destroying Latinus city with fire. Queen Amata has lost her mind and hangs herself, a tragic end of Queen Amata. Turnus confronts his disguised sister and spurns her aid, preferring a heroic death. He jumps from his chariot and calls to his men to allow him to seek single combat with Aeneas. With Aeneas accepts, the two armies draw back. The combatants are both larger than life. Turnus tries to throw a large boulder at Aeneas, but his strength is flagging. He has no escape, and Aeneas finally spears him in his thigh. Turnus concedes defeat and asks that his body be given a proper burial, even that his life be spared. But Aeneas sees Pallas' sword belt around Turnus and in a final rage exacts his vengeance, slaying Turnus with his sword. So Turnus finally meets his end at the hands of Aeneas. When we look at the adventurous events that paint this great poem, definitely we can conclude describing this as a national epic. It is less concerned with the life and adventures of Aeneas than with the part he played in founding the Roman state. It glorifies the patriotism. It also captures the beauty of subtle human emotions, different shades, both positive and negative. Finally, it paints a picture of a huge emotional canvas, and Virgil did a great job by leaving this to the coming generations to learn a lot from this national epic. Thank you.